Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be going over the playoffs for North America's Stage Number 2 2023 season for Rainbow Six Siege. A few things to get out of the way at the beginning here. I'm doing this differently, not going to have any clips. Obviously the previous video didn't have clips either, but this one is because CGG's down, so it makes it much harder for me to get clips. Also, some people in the previous video, like when I show the stats on the screen rather than the clips, I assume they're a vocal minority and there's a silent majority that prefer the clips. Do let me know if you like the clips better. And also this will probably be a little bit ramblier, and so let me know if you like when I have the extra stuff or if you like the really concise versions I've been trying to do recently. One more thing, I wanted to point out that there's a video that I just watched and I thought it was pretty cool, but I guess not a lot of people have seen it. It's sort of talking about esports and the financials from a player or content creator perspective and the work-life balance, things like that. And it has Drip, Onigiri, Gorgona, and Garfield with Stock, so 3 pro/former pro players and then a content creator. So I'll link it in the description, check it out, and if you want, let them know High Ground sent you, even though I'm sure they have no idea who High Ground is. Without further ado, let's talk about these games. The first matchup we're going to talk about of the 7 we'll discuss today is Sonics versus Oxygen. 2-0 win in favor of Sonics, but a close 2-0 as they like to say. You can see the maps here. We got Clubhouse, Chalet, and Oregon, which we don't end up seeing. And then in terms of how the maps go down in specific, Sonics get an early lead in both maps. It's a 5-2 in the first map, 4-2 in the second map, and you can actually see it here, and I'll show the other one in a second. But Oxygen does battle back. They get a bunch of rounds in a row or nearly in a row to push it to 6-5 in their favor, in Oxygen's favor. But then Sonics not only push overtime, but win in overtime. So we can see that here, 6-5, and then a bunch of rounds for Sonics. And then over here, almost 4 rounds in a row, broken up by the one Sonics round, but they get to 6-5 again, Oxygen does. And then 3 rounds in a row for Sonics to close out the series. This one really reminds me of when Oxygen played against BDS at the Charlotte Major. Oxygen had to push overtime against BDS both maps. I think they were down 4-6 and 5-6 in some order on the 2 maps, and then they won in overtime, so eliminating BDS in the quarters of the Charlotte Major. In terms of the stats here, the best player in the lobby was Yaga. It feels a little bit disingenuous to call a player on the losing team the MVP, but maybe if they go absolutely nuclear, I guess he had the best stats in the lobby by a good margin, but whatever, you probably would call Gunner the MVP because of the team that won. You see 3 Oxygen players on the bottom here, even though 4 of the Sonics players had sub 100 EPS, which is about average. And then we have a bunch of stats here. I don't really want to talk about anything in particular. I'll just scroll through them really slowly so that you can pause if you want to see anything here. And one final thing I wanted to mention here, these 2 teams have met quite a lot within NA, maybe more than any other team. Don't quote me on that, I don't know that for sure, but they've met twice in the regular stages, so stage 1 and stage 2, and then they met twice last stage in the playoffs/LCQ. They played each other in the seeding match and then also in the LCQ, and then they met again here. So 5 times in a year, whereas some of the teams have only met once because they weren't in stage 1 or stage 2, or 2, I guess, for the teams that have been in both stages. Maybe they didn't meet at all in either of the playoffs, but I just wanted to point that out, that they've played quite a lot at this point this year. Match number 2 is Space Station versus Wildcard. I think a little bit of an upset, despite Wildcard having a better stage in general than Space Station. Space Station's recent games looked pretty good. They got off to a pretty poor start and then they sort of bounced back, whereas Wildcard got a lot of their points early on in the stage and then fell off a little bit towards the end. And yeah, I sort of expected a Space Station victory, and it looked like they were going to do it 2-0. They took the first map 7-5, so fairly close, 7-5 on Clubhouse. And then we go to Cafe, and it's very, very close. Space Station definitely let the game get away from them a little bit. They were up 6-3, and then they lose 3 rounds in a row, and then they lose in overtime. So had they run in round 10, 11, or 12, or I guess 14 or 15, they had a lot of match point opportunities. They let them all slip away, and then they go to Oregon and they get pretty thoroughly crushed 7-2, which ends up hurting the stats on Space Station quite a bit. Their best player having 100 EPS, whereas Mark and Spirits are above that or significantly above that. And did I miss anything over here? Yeah, I think this is pretty cool having this on the Ubisoft. The trades, I'm not sure what metric they use, like what the window is. Is it 4-second window? Is it a 10-second window? But it's cool to have regardless of however they measure it. And then to see plants opening kills, all that stuff. Nice to see in a concise way like that. And then again, I'll show the stats down here just for anybody that's interested. Feel free to pause and we will move on to the next match. Next up, we have Space Station taking down Oxygen 2-0, and this is a very decisive game, but this is also the lowest stakes game of all the ones we're going to talk about today. All the other games are for a bunch of money and some SI points and some bragging rights, or qualifying you for the major, or putting you in a position to do those things. This one is just a seeding match with some money on the line. So really, this boils down to being an $8,000 money match, no SI points on the line, but the main purpose of this matchup is for seeding, but that doesn't even matter too much because although in theory theory, it should always be better to be a higher seed. In practice, the way that this system works, you might even just want to be the lower seed if you think you have a better matchup against the team that you'll play. So whatever, this is mostly an $8,000 money match. The opening kills and the trades are actually very close, but it's very much in the favor of Space Station when it comes to the kills and the plants and the round counts as well. 7-2 on Skyscrapers, 7-3 on Consulate. Don't even need to see map number 3, Cafe. And Hot and Cold was their worst player in the previous matchup, but he really shows up here in the matchup. That again doesn't really matter nearly as much. J9O also doing pretty well. And Yaga, once again, the best player for auction. He's had a phenomenal individual stage. It might end up being wasted depending on how the LCQ goes if they don't qualify for the major. That would be pretty brutal because he's had a lights out stage. And then looking at the numbers here, I'll just go down the line. Only 19 rounds played over the course of the 2 maps, so not a huge sample size, and so some maybe outliers as a result of that. And scroll to the bottom here and we'll move on to an important match. And now we have matches that will qualify teams for the major. We have 4 matches left to talk about. 3 of them will send teams to the major, and the other one is a pretty heavy money match also for some SI points. Sonics take down Dark Zero 2-1 here, and this is a bit of a classic rivalry. We don't see any overtime, unfortunately, but we still get to see some close-ish maps. 7-4 on Border, 7-5 on Consulate, but Sonics close it out fairly decisively, 7-3 on Nighthaven Labs. We see pretty close in terms of plants and I guess kills depending on how you look at it. Obviously 14 more kills is a significant number, but there's so many kills that it's, you know, percentage wise maybe not that significant, but Sonic's much better on opening kills and trades. Looking at the stats, the top 4 players are all Sonics players, and then we see all 5 Dark Zero players, and then Geo alone here at the bottom. But if one Sonics player is going to have the worst stats, it's of course going to be Geo because of the roles he plays. And yeah, we'll scroll through the stats really quickly here, just for the sake of checking them out if you are interested. Other than that, we're going to move on, and yeah, this puts Sonics in a top 2 position, and this puts Dark Zero not quite in a do or die position, but if they lose the next one, they're going to have to go through the LCQ, which can surely be a daunting task, so we'll have to see in a moment if they do it, but you probably already know if they do it or not. And now for the other phase 2 of the major qualifying game, we have M80 versus Wildcard, another 2-0, but another close 2-0, just like we saw in Sonics versus Oxygen, and it's a 7-5 victory for M80 on Bank, and then an 8-7 victory for them on Border. And of course they were the better team on Bank, not by a massive margin, it was 7-5, but on Border, absolute heartbreak. Wildcard definitely should have taken this. This is probably their best map after what we saw in the regular stage, but not only going into the matchup, but they certainly were ahead. They had a 6-4 lead in terms of rounds, so they had a couple of opportunities to close it out. And one of these rounds, Diaz Lucas got a pretty monstrous 1v2, maybe even a 1v3 clutch, and he was on like low health as Castle, just one of the absolute worst circumstances. The enemy team, Wildcard in this case, had a decent amount of time on the clock, so it wasn't a massive scramble. It was a tough one to watch, and had they won that round, of course, because they only lost the game by a single round, then they would have won it. So that is what went down, and we'll see a little bit more heartbreak from Wildcard. Following this up in a moment, M80 a little bit better on kills, and actually a little bit better on everything except for plants, which they were much better at. In terms of DPS, Adam went absolutely nuclear. I think it was the second map, he had like 21 kills. Incredible performance, and it's got to especially feel badly to do that well and then not even win that map, and then of course obviously not winning the series either. But we see 4 of the M80 players following up Adam, a bunch of the Wildcard players unfortunately here. At the bottom, we'll see the stats once again, and then we will move on. Here we go. The penultimate game of North America's playoffs, and the final one from the playoff to send a team to the major is Dark Zero versus Wildcard. 2-1 victory for Dark Zero, and another heartbreak for Wildcard. So even if they'd won Border against M80, they would have had to win a 3rd map, and who knows, maybe they would have just gotten smashed on that 3rd map. And they do sort of get smashed here on their 3rd map against Dark Zero, but they lost the very first map 8-7. So had they won this one, they of course would have 2-0'd because they do win the 2nd map, which is Oregon. But again, when they go to that 3rd map, Cafe, it's a pretty decisive victory for Dark Zero. And the heartbreak's even worse because it's not like it was a super close map number 1 for a lot of it. Wildcard are up 5-3, and then I guess they're up 6-4, so they had 2 map point opportunities, and then they even take the first round of overtime. So they have 4 map point opportunities throughout the whole game. They're not able to get any of them. Dark Zero persist, go to the 2nd map, and they do lose. But again, had Wildcard just won this 1st map, it would have been a 2-0. They would have gone to the major, but now they have to fight through the LCQ, so they're not completely dead in the water. They have one more chance, but they're going to have to win multiple matches to capitalize on that chance. So we'll see what happens there. In terms of the stats, NJR the best player, and I mean very, very much the MVP because of the way that he sort of clutched in the last round. It was a 2v3, but I think he got all 3 of those kills, so he really secured. The 1st map, map, which ended up being very, very important in the series overall. But NJR, Canadian, and Pamba, the top 3 players, all being from Dark Zero. I'll also mention, I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it now, Bolo subbing in for Merc. Merc had a bit of a tragedy in the family, so I'm not going to go into that. I mean, feel free to go on his Twitter and whatever if you want to investigate, but I'll leave it at that. And Bolo subbed in. He didn't do amazingly, obviously, bottom 3 player in terms of rating, but as far as just subbing in for a game, I think he filled the role well enough. But you do have to wonder, had Merc been able to play this game, would this have gone differently? Would Wildcard have won it? And yeah, we'll just go through the stats here, and then we'll call it good and move on. And the final matchup of the playoffs, Sonics versus M80. This one, they're not playing to go to the major because both of these teams have already qualified. They are sort of playing to go to SI, or M80 is at least. If they'd won this, they would have been locked in for SI, but they're basically locked in. It doesn't matter too much. The biggest thing that they're playing for is the money. This is it's a significant amount of money they're playing for, a lot more than SSG and Oxygen were playing for in their matchup. And a little bit of history, these two teams have had sort of pretty different years. Sonics did well in the group stage last stage, whereas M80 did poorly, but then Sonics did poorly in the playoffs, had to go through the LCQ. They did make it through the LCQ though to make it to the major, whereas M80 breezed through the playoffs. They were the first seed from North America, but then at the major, M80 did poorly, and Sonics were the best performing team from North America. Give M80, I think, one more chance because they did quite well at Gamers 8, which is a big tournament, even if it's technically a non-official one, and that was their first attempt at a major with this iteration of the roster. In the group stage, M80 was the best team, and Sonics, they had their struggles, but they were still pretty solid. Same sort of thing as in the group stage last stage, and here they are meeting each other. So maybe M80 has been the best team regionally so far this year, and Sonics has been the best team internationally, even though it's just been the one major I'm talking about. So we'll see what happens this time around. And again, that is sort of discounting the Gamers 8 event, which is sort of non-official, but yeah, Sonics take it down here though, 2-1, and same sort of thing that they did against Dark Zero, where they lost the first map, but then win the next 2. And I guess so in all 3 of their matchups, including the auction one, they won 2 maps in a row, but in the case of this one and against Dark Zero, they lost the first map. In terms of the kills, very close. Same thing, trades, dead even, but Sonics a lot better on plants and also opening kills. So those were probably the big 2 things that allowed them to pull ahead in the end. In terms of the stats, Citizen goes nuclear, obviously the MVP of this matchup, and then the next 3 players are all M80 players. And then here are the stats, and then not done quite yet. We'll go back and look at the bracket and just do a quick little recap. So here you have it. These are the matches we just talked about. Sonics take down Auctions 2-0. Wildcard takes down Space Station 2-1, and a very close one. All of Wildcard's games ended up being pretty close, even though one of them was a 2-0. But again, we talked about all this. They pretty narrowly defeated Space Station. Had one thing gone slightly differently, Space Station would have advanced. Had one thing gone slightly differently here, they would have gone to map 3, and then who knows who would have advanced. And then same thing, Wildcard versus Dark Zero. Had one thing gone differently, then it would have been Wildcard making it to the major, although they have one more shot. Dark Zero versus Sonics and Sonics versus M80 were both pretty close affairs. Sonics taking down both of them after losing the first map in both of them, and then the LCQ match. The only real blowout, I guess we saw a few 2-0s, but this one had double overtime. This one had max regulation into overtime. This one had, you know, auction only winning 5 rounds. But again, it's the lowest stakes one, so no reason to sweat it too hard. Of course, you were playing for $8,000, but you might argue that $8,000 is not enough of an incentive to show anything important, because if you make it through the LCQ, you get to go to the major, and it helps you make SI, and you can get all that money. So it could even be an investment, depending on how you look at it. But whatever, you know, maybe you thought Space Station was the better team, maybe you thought Auction wasn't taking it seriously. Whatever the case, yeah, Sonics, M80, Dark Zero all going to the major, and I think right now they're playing the LCQ. I really would have liked to have done this video over the weekend or before that, but again, CGG being down did complicate things, and I just decided to say forget it, we'll do it a different way. So I guess, yeah, I'm planning to do the Europe one of these probably tomorrow. I don't know if I'm uploading this one today or tomorrow, but probably the next day after this one's uploaded. And I guess that's going to do it for me. So like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will catch you guys next time.